topic of the hour is thought leadership. And I have heard our very own Randall Craig present on thought leadership and his presentation, expertise, thought leadership, and it's not called thought followership many times. And I've watched and listened to interviews of you, Randall, talking about thought leadership. And in those cases, the people asking the questions are not insiders here at the Brain Trust who know all the things that you know about or that you talk about thought leadership. My goal for this hour as Randall's aspiring protege and sounding board, I would like to engage in like a higher order conversation where I can ask some questions as someone like an insider a little bit. Would that be okay?
Sure, let's
Okay.
make it happen.
Okay. Okay. So for anyone that wants to catch up on Randall's, material on thought leadership, we have on our website. You can reach out to me. There's lots of content on YouTube from us and him being interviewed by others. Or bring him to your next event to talk about it, inspire your people from Randall himself. So I'll get started with questions shortly, but first a little bit about Randall. Randall has founded several successful startups. He's held a long-time position at a Big Four consulting firm. He was a senior executive at an American public company, author of 8 books, in the Speaker Hall of Fame. He's helped over 1,000 organizations scale. He works with me at the Brain Trust Professional Institute, and he is often referred to as a thought leader. So Randall, you are a Renaissance man of the business world. You are a sought-after coach and speaker because of your deep expertise in a wide array of specializations, and yet the pursuit of thought leadership and using it in marketing and brand is very near and dear to you. Like, talk to me about how that came to be. How did thought leadership become like such a focus for you?
So it's a great question, but I gotta correct you. It's not, I haven't done this for 1,000 companies. Okay,
1,000, I can edit that, Randall, but okay, I'm going to say
it's quite all right. It's quite all right. I've helped about 100 organizations. I may have spoken to 1,000 audiences on this topic and others and everything. So let me first say that the whole question of what the heck is thought leadership is important as a foundational bit to the question you ask, Rania. Because at the very beginning, I certainly did not start out thinking, okay, today I'm going to put in place the 20-year plan to become a thought leader. And if somebody asked me today, Randall, are you a thought leader? I would say, I certainly don't call myself that. I certainly have a lot of thought leadership content. We could talk about, later, what tests there are to see if you think that you could become a thought leader. But I certainly don't call myself that. I think that's very arrogant and egotistical. On the other hand, a lot of people do listen to what I have to say, and you're right. I do have some very interesting expertise. I think that perhaps in my particular career, I've had the opportunity to learn from a lot of very smart people. Certainly, like most, I've had mentors over the years. But as a management consultant, I've been able to see the inside of a lot of companies early in my career. That's been very helpful. I started writing and sharing some of my knowledge in a tip sheet. I remember starting this many, many years ago, and I had 12 subscribers. And when I had 12 subscribers, that isn't a thought leader. I guess I'm leading thinking for 12 people. But if you look at who those 12 people were, there's my mom and my dad, and I've got 3 kids, and then I've got my wife, and I've got a couple best friends, right? So that really wasn't much of a following. That certainly wasn't much of a thought leadership. But I think the idea, though, of actually considering thoughts and codifying them down was something that I found very, very, very helpful. So for me, I've got my business growth tip sheet, which to this day, it comes out every single week, that focuses on one specific topic. And that wasn't some great plan to become a thought leader, etc. It's just more, okay, how do I help share some of my thinking? How do I codify it? How do I make it so that all the topics that I've written about, I have pre-thought about it? So when I'm consulting, when I'm coaching, when I'm advising, when I'm facilitating, and people ask me a question, well, if I pre-thought about it, it becomes a lot easier to contextualize the answer for whoever happens to be there. So I started to do that, and then I started to do videos. Okay, we had a video podcast that we just stopped a while ago. There's I don't know, 150, 200 episodes of that. And those are also just 5 minutes sort of bits and pieces. And then all of a sudden, the media would start calling and asking me to share my thoughts on one thing or the other. And then I started to write books, and one of them was a bestseller. And then people asked me to speak, and it went on and on and on and on. So there was no grand plan except for the fact that I realized that certain part, and I think this is, the unwritten question or the unspoken question you asked is why do you care? Why do you really care? And at the very beginning, I didn't, and I still don't really, but it just, it turns out that I'm doing a lot of things that are very healthy. If you want to, if you want your thought leadership material to be out there, it gives you a sustainable competitive advantage. I think that is something very, very powerful. You become that category of one. You get better client retention if you're an advisor. Um, it's a foundation for any inbound marketing you do. It supports higher fees. It gives you connections to other people who might also be big thinkers or have some degree of influence. I think I think that once you start to see some of those benefits, you say, okay, well, I guess it makes some sense. I make some sense. It certainly helps with it certainly helps with the business growth if you're in any kind of advisory role. Because the amount of time that you spend directly doing outbound marketing is replaced by doing client work and inbound marketing.
You talked about that path from, early tip sheet to media interviews to best-selling author to Hall of Fame business speaker. So Randall, you said you didn't start with a master plan, but now that you're in it with all the opportunities, like what is next? Like there are people who have newsletters and are speakers. Like what would be next on that trajectory? Do you have a sense?
Well, you're right. Everybody's on a trajectory. I think the fact that I sort of fell into what I was doing over many, many years means I've got a couple lessons to share. And I think that, we've been banding around in this conversation, Rania, expertise, expert, thought leader, etc. Many, many people have got expertise. You go to school, you do some basic client work, you work with smart people, you have expertise. A smaller number can truly be called experts. They truly are experts in whatever it is. And just a few of those experts are really could be considered thought leaders. And I think one of the challenges today is that there are too many people who call themselves thought leaders when in fact they're not, right? And so back to your question, as you sort of go through that expertise to expert to thought leader trajectory, what are some of the specific things that you can do to actually reduce friction, grease the wheels, make it easier for you to do it? And probably the thing that I would say is you don't have to do it alone, or you don't have to figure out your unique set of tasks, if you will. You can borrow some of the ideas on how to actually do it. Just a simple thing. We've got a course, thought leadership to grow your business. That's got what, 53 different specific things in an order of operation. You've got another course, building your influence and impact, which is not about thought leadership per se, but how to build influence. We've got one on tactical stuff, super efficient writing and editing. We've got one on personal branding. There's no reason why you've got to try and discover some of these things yourself. You can take the blueprint, if you will, and say, okay, let me take a look at this blueprint. Let me take as much from this as I've done. Most people are not starting at square one. Okay, they've already made a number of steps. If you're listening to this, you probably are very well known, or you're aspiring to be very well known, one or the other. But take the blueprint. It's very simple, and say, let me just go through it, right? And if some of the parts of the blueprint don't work for you, or they don't work with your strategy, that's fine. But I think that what's next for people is to say, I could do it just by myself. I can sort of grope around in the dark to try and figure out what it is and where I need to go, etc. And there's some merit in that. There's no question, but it just might be a much slower trajectory compared to if you had a bit of help. You know, you could also do coaching. Okay, I certainly coach people in the area. It's far more economic just to take one of the courses, but you don't need to do it yourself, right? You don't need to do it yourself. Take the blueprint and figure it out from there.
Randall, you said you don't call yourself a thought leader. We'll leave that aside for now. And you said too many people who are not thought leaders call themselves thought leaders. Okay, so there's confusion around this label. Do you have an opinion on when in that trajectory that we talked about, like when do you when can you deserve to be called a thought leader? Like when does a content creator become a thought leader?
Um, I think you will know when you are, when all of a sudden the benefits of being a thought leader begin to accrue. The category of one, the sustainable, competitive differentiation, better client retention, easier client, business development, the higher fees, etc. Once you start to get some of those, you could probably say, okay, something's happening right. But on the other hand, I think there's some merit in saying, okay, so what are their tests? And I've come up with 10 different factors, and pardon me for rambling on right now, but I think that if you look at each of these factors, and you can say, how am I doing there? And it's not a question of give myself a grade, an A or B or C or D or F, but really the question is, okay, on each of these ones, are there some very specific things that I can do every single day, every single week, with my team, whatever it happens to be, to actually increase your score, if you will, on each of these 10 tests. And it almost, once again, becomes a bit of a to-do list of saying, okay, what can we do? Some things we can, are factual. So let me just go through the 10 tests, and then if there's any particular that you want to dive into, I'm happy to, talk more about it. One is the economic test. How much are people willing to pay you? If they're willing to pay an awful lot, that probably means that they value what you've got, which might mean you're a thought leader. The traditional media test, how many magazine or traditional media or online profiles exist about you? How often are you called to actually opine on whatever the particular topic is that's your expertise? I know I've got around 450, 500 or so media interviews and profiles under my belt, which is kind of cool. Excuse me. Somehow they found out about you, these third parties. There's a speaker author test. Do people want to have you speak on your particular area of expertise? Have you written deeply about those things? If you've got a book, is it a bestseller? Not an Amazon bestseller, but a real bestseller, right? The activity level test. How much stuff do you actually pump out every day, every week, right? If you're doing that, then it's more likely that you're an expert because you're actually thinking of it. By the way, I should say, Chat GPT is not thought leadership. Chat GPT is a system, okay, that can create stuff which is not exactly original, which is not thought leadership, etc. So the activity level test is really about your own. Related to that is the longevity test. How many years have you been doing it? It sort of reminds me. I was at a conference many years ago, um, and this person was a social media expert, and somebody was talking to this person who was an intelligent person, a great presenter, but to me it didn't seem like they had much experience. There was no longevity. So somebody I was with said, I'm just curious, before social media, what did you do? And the person said, well, before that I was an Y2K expert. And they said, oh, very good. What did you do before then? Well, before then, I was I forget what it was. It was some other kind of expert, a real estate sales expert. And before that, it was a vacuum cleaner sales expert. They were selling vacuum cleaners, right? So if you end up doing all these different things, there's no longevity. If on the other hand, you've got a huge longevity in the particular area, then it's more likely. Um, What other ones? A social follower test. How many people follow you on the various different platforms? And by the way, are they the right people? The database test. How many people do you have on your in your list? And how active it is. The community involvement test. How often do people tap you on the shoulder to get you involved in particular things within the community, however you define community? The fancy title test. The fancy title test is the more senior you are in a very large organization, the more likely that you might be one as well. And finally, the Google test. How do you do in Google? And it's both the scope of influence as well as the depth of your knowledge. So, that one, it seems pretty interesting because you might think, well, if you do a lot of SEO, that might be able to help you on the Google test. Well, it can only help so much. In my particular case, I've never paid a penny for any kind of Google test. But if you actually did a search for, say, choosing a business growth speaker, it's just something that has nothing supposedly to do with me. Um, I come up on the first page of Google, and very often the very first entry after all the ads, right? So you can't manufacture that kind of thing. It's just something that, because of all those other tests, Google tries to reflect. So those are all those tests. And once again, if you give yourself a grade on all of them, you might not do as well as you think, and I wouldn't be upset. It's really more of a question of here's maybe some indicators of how you can actually do a little bit better, and reap the benefits.
Randall, your 10 tests have been thought-provoking for many people and really helped a lot of leaders assess, how influential or they really are. Would it be okay if we're going to play a game. I'm going to suggest some possible thought leadership tests or maybe other angles to your tests, and you're going to tell me acceptable or not acceptable thought leadership test, okay?
Okay, let's see where this goes.
For me, listen, I'm here to understand how tests became tests.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Thought leadership test examiner, okay? Where is I'm going to call this test the E equals MC squared test. Where is the impact test? What impact have you had in your industry? Right? We have the job title test and the community test and the economic test and longevity test. And truly, truly, Randall, there's merit to all of them. But for me, if I even go bigger, where is the positive contribution to society test?
I think that's a brilliant one. I guess we're going to be writing another tip sheet, which is and changing it to the 11 tests of. Listen, there are no shortage of ideas of how to test. That's why the thought leadership course is got 53 different activities, right? I think the impact on an industry test is absolutely huge, just absolutely huge. I couldn't agree with you more, actually. And think about it. It begs the question, how do you actually measure that particular one? And I do have some ideas. Okay, are you actually recognized by your peers for your impact on the industry? If you are, then that's probably not a bad thing. Maybe you are a thought leader, and because your peers, those who are like you, recognize you as such. I'm particularly proud. I was inducted into the Speaking Hall of Fame, the Professional Speaking Hall of Fame. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. Okay, that's an example of that kind of thing. Or I was made a fellow of the Certified Management Consultants Association of profession in Canada. Well, that's a pretty good thing. There's not many people who are fellows. That's an impact one. Or the Griner Award that the Canadian Society of Association Executives gave me for my impact on the sector and the country, right? So yeah, there are those things, and many people who are in that kind of zone will have some of those third-party endorsements of the actual impact. There's other things, the Presidential Award or in Canada the Order of Canada, etc. On a societal level. I don't know. I don't have any of those. Okay.
Not yet.
Not yet, not yet. But the idea of getting the third party endorsement is a thread that runs through the 10 tests I went over, but it also is central to the one that you just brought up. So yeah, absolutely.
Okay, you have a longevity test. A lot has been said now about the lifespan of information. Okay, so somebody that went to school, 10 years ago, 20, 30 years ago, how relevant is that knowledge for the current environment? So absolutely right. We don't want someone who put up a shingle and called themselves an expert, last Tuesday, but we do see, employers, people that degree from 10, even 5 years ago, how new is, depending on the industry, how new is the information? The idea of longevity in industry isn't, is it perhaps not as relevant anymore?
You know what? There's no question um, the velocity of business and society has increased. And there's no question that old information from decades and decades and decades ago may not have as much value today just because so much has changed. There was no internet 30 years ago, 40 years ago. There is no AI. There was no, mobile phones, internet. Like it's changed quite a bit. And so really the question for me isn't by the way, and back to the longevity test, when you're able to have gone through a whole bunch of economic cycles and your knowledge is still relevant, right? When you're able to sort of have seen sort of the impact of a lot of these changes, you learn something about change, right? And implementation of change and everything. So, Leah, um, you Victor Hugo said famously, there's only so many stories that have ever been told. Okay, we're just telling those stories in different ways. So I do believe there is value in the old information we have. But let me ask you a question, Rania. How many business books do you read every month, approximately?
Me?
You.
A lot. I should give you a number.
Yeah, give me a number per week. Over the last week, how many books have you read?
Uh,
Business books.
Anywhere from 1 to 3 books, let's say.
So 3 books a week. Well, let's say average two. And there's 4 weeks, so you read 8 business books a month. Okay, this
A
is
good month, depending on how many clients we have that take up my time.
yeah, but my point here is that you've been doing this for years, right? And this is an amazing example of how it's not a question of just what we learned way back in school, right? And for that matter, the client work that we do, which we learn an awful lot from every client we serve. But what are we doing to sort of add new raw material in? I also read prolifically, right? Because, and the more information you get in, that's the whole, tenor behind the Brain Trust Professional Institute and all of our self-paced courses and our ongoing CPD for organizations. Not everyone can read 8 books a month, every single month. Uh, but we can, you can, I can, right? We invest dramatically. So as a result of that, maybe it's a little bit easier to say, well, maybe you don't have time for reading all those books, but you do have time to attend monthly CPD, or you do have time, for example, for some of these self-paced courses. You do have time for some of those things because it's all distilled down to a particular thing. And I think that's really the question of, how relevant is the knowledge? I think once we start to layer all these things on, it starts to mean something, synergistic. The sum is greater than the parts. Just a very simple example. One way of getting that knowledge is coaching. So if I'm coaching, for example, somebody in the leadership team of an organization, they're learning in one particular way. I might suggest a particular book or something. They could learn another way. Well, thank you for also doing monthly CPD sessions for the organizations. There's more at an organizational level that's being put in, right? If, for example, I'm doing the keynote at the annual conference, that's another. If we're running the retreat, that's another way. So all of a sudden, all these different ways of information coming in will sort of move the organizational level up that next level. Now you asked at an individual level, but I think that you got to keep knowledge refreshed. And for those of us who are in the called the knowledge space. I don't want to say thought leaders, but we've got to work twice as hard. We've got to be working with challenging clients. We've got to be doing our own R&D. We've got to be pushing the limit in terms of thinking through some of the ideas, which is kind of why we have all of the content that we continually pump out rather than just content from 15 or 20 years ago. So it's a good question. And I think that not everyone really thinks through about what's actually possible, as opposed to, gee, I did learning a long time ago, and maybe that's it.
Okay, the next test I'm going to put on the microscope. The academic test. Okay, Randall, you have lots and lots of alphabet soup after your name, and they serve you very well. For younger generations who are, thematically largely disillusioned with institutions, and we see definitely a trend away from the prestige awarded to higher education that we saw in previous generations. We also see more and more high-profile companies not requiring degrees and saying we care about experience more than the piece of paper. Have you considered updating or adding a caveat to your academic test, or like regarding experience, the experience test?
So I think the experience test is really more in longevity. It's in the activity level. It's embedded within there. But you asked me a good question. Should we have something specifically called the academic test? First, I'll say, it's very hard for a 23-year-old right out of college or university to suddenly say, I'm a thought leader, right? Because, they don't have the experience. They don't have the experiences to actually do it. I think that the academic test is really one where we say, and most people who are in the expert sort of range, usually they do have some degree of academics behind them. I think that that's good potential. It's a good potential. Ground for growing expertise and everything. Like, take, for example, an accountant or a lawyer or a consultant or a whole bunch of, even a doctor for that matter. They go and they get some education, a fair amount of it. Then they take some, further training, and then they're qualified to actually do that work. And the regulators in a lot of these organizations say you have to actually do continuing professional development every single year because we want to make sure that you're up to date. I mean, we offer that at the Brain Trust, fine, okay, but to be able to say that you have got no degrees, no professional certifications, no designations, nothing, and then that's the path to becoming a thought leader just because you've got the experience. There's no doubt that we could find an edge case of some people who've gone through that particular path. The crazy entrepreneur that sort of quits high school and makes millions of dollars and becomes an expert in the very narrow area. Yes, it is possible. I'm sure we could find them, right? But for most people who are listening to this, the question of gee, do you have some of the raw materials that you actually need to sort of move beyond just expert to thought leader, beyond just expertise to expert? Usually you're looking for, once again, on one hand, the knowledge, but also the third-party endorsement. So behind me, for example, there's a whole bunch of those little things, right? There's a whole bunch of them. And what I would say is that, yeah, I learned something when I did every single one of those. But more importantly, now that I've got them, they're indicators to prospective clients that perhaps I've reached a certain level in a particular area of knowledge. And I think that that's got a separate kind of dimension than purely experiential. I think if you don't have the experience, you can't amplify your academics. But I think that it's important to recognize that for the vast majority of people who are seeking the benefits of being a thought leader, it's something, it's like almost table stakes.
Next test.
Okay.
Mention the activity test. Randall, to my mind, all of your 10 tests, stand together in harmony, each building on, support, stand alone. But to my mind, two of them, there may pose a conflict. So
Okay.
help me tease this out. One of your tests is the economic test, how much you are making and how much you can monetize your thought leadership. And the other test is the activity test. How busy is your calendar? How much activity are you doing? How many engagements do you have? The leader that speaks and writes for free or for less will certainly be busier than the one that has a higher price tag. With that, we'll break here for part 1 of our Q&A on thought leadership. We'll pick up with more Q&A in part 2. And if anything we've talked about so far resonates with you, if you're interested in learning more about how to develop your thought leadership, to reach out. We'd be happy to have a conversation and share resources. You can email us at info@randallcraig.com or book a call, www.randallcraig.net/30. See you back for part 2.